go back to our guest line, and Bob Joyce joins us now from the UConn Radio Network. And Bob, it was a close one last year. I'm sure the UConn fans are excited for this game coming off a solid performance in week one.
Yeah, I would think the fans and the football team are. Hello there, Mr. Sideline Reporter, women's basketball guy.
Exactly.
Good
to talk to you.
But yes, I think there is reason to think, and this is just me thinking, and maybe I'm not the only one, I think we're going to see some points on Saturday at the Dome. Both sides. A lot of good offenses. UConn's offense, all their skilled guys, or a good chunk of them, were back from last year's game. And even Jim told us today, Jim Mora, he thinks they're a little better equipped. They just can't get punched in the mouth like they did right off the bat last season. And, they played pretty much catch up most of the game against the Orange last season. But, I think there's reason to think that we're going to have some fun Saturday in the Orange's home opener.
Yeah, I think it's two teams that run the football very well, and it seems like the run defenses for both sides are a little bit of a question mark right now, definitely for Syracuse, and that was a question mark for them last year. How would you compare, Bob, this year's team for UConn to last year's team? Seems like you guys returned a good chunk on offense.
Definitely. And even though the offensive line is reworked somewhat, there's still a lot of game experience. Everybody on that offensive line played some games last season. So they have that, including Wes Ho, who was a former Syracuse transfer. He's been great at center since he came to UConn. And the two inside guys have really done a nice job. They had to replace two guys on the outside who went to the draft. In fact, Chase Lunt made the Bills roster. So that took a little bit of reworking. But Gordy Samus, who not only is the offensive line coach, but he's also the offensive coordinator, has done a fabulous job with the offensive line. Somehow Joe Fagnano's back for his seventh year. I mean, I know you have an eighth-year guy.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Line, but
David Reese has him beat somehow with the 8 years.
It just doesn't make sense. But Skyler Bell coming back was massive. Alex Honig, one of the tight ends. And like everybody, UConn's got huge tight ends. The running game's there. Cam Edwards, Mel Brown, the top two running backs, but you can throw Victor Rosa in there and a couple of other guys that made some impacts and, got their feet wet on Saturday. And then after Skyler Bell, they've got a pretty good group of wideouts. So, offensively they're better off than the defensive part. I think the defense is still coming together. And that's why I have a thought that, we might see some additional offense than we saw from 31-24 last year. I think the over-under is mid-50s right now, something like that?
Yeah, I think so. I've been saying it all week. I see it being an over for sure. I could see it maybe not being like a total shootout, but somewhere in the neighborhood of, 34-27, somewhere, just a little bit more scoring than what we saw last year, I think is probably fair to expect. You bring up Skyler Bell and how big of a deal it was to get him back. And pretty amazing that Michigan, it seems like, just straight up offered him $500,000. He turned it down. How awesome is it just to have him back? And it seems like he is a game breaker for you guys this year once again after he had a great game last year in the Dome.
Yeah, it's huge. Michigan took a big look, but he so aptly put it during camp. Money's not everything. Money is great, but, you're going to sit there and watch the game. A lot of the guys that left UConn are doing just that. And Bell, wants to play. And I think the fact that Joe Fagnano came back certainly helped in that decision. But to have him back as the top dog is immense. He really hit the weights in the offseason. Two things that he really emphasized: jumping ability to really try to outfight guys at the point, at the high point of the football. Break tackles. We saw some of that on Saturday against an inferior Central Connecticut State University team, but at least we saw glimpses of that. And the over-the-shoulder catch that he made just before halftime was just phenomenal, and a little out pattern, that fade pattern that Joe Fagnano threw to him was just incredible. The kid's got a ton of talent, and to him to lead the wide receiver room, and his leadership has just been immense so far.
Bob Joyce with us, a fellow sideline reporter, women's basketball guy, just does it for UConn. He's part of the UConn Radio Network, and we're getting to know the Huskies a little bit more before the Saturday matchup, noon kickoff inside the Dome. Bob, I wonder, I'm sure UConn fans are really excited for this game. Is the temperature of the fan base right now that, we only lost by 7 last year. They don't have Kyle McCord this year. They're coming off a bad loss week 1. Is the temperature that they really think they might hang in this game, kind of like they have in the other ACC games recently?
I think they're getting a little bit full of themselves. Look, I'm watching the game right now, the Tennessee-Syracuse game. And, yeah, Tennessee played really well, especially got out to an early start. But, look, you still got, a really good quarterback. You've got some good wideouts. I mean, I love, Valari, the tight end. I mean, he is just so versatile. And you got a couple of bruises at running back. So it's not like, they lost to a chump team in Tennessee who, their pace of play is just insane. And like UConn, too, defensively, they've got a lot of holes to fill. Syracuse does. Now, and Tennessee is not, UConn is not Tennessee offensively, but they can go up tempo. But, yeah, the fan base is excited. We had a lot of near misses against ACC teams last year. We got another chance to do that, do some damage against them this year. Syracuse Saturday, mid-October we go to Boston College. That game kind of fell in both teams' lap because UMass went to the MAC, so they got together and made a replacement game. We get Duke at the Rent in November, and then Air Force. So those are the kind of the high-profile games on the schedule, and it'd be nice to put a dent against an ACC team. They're close. Jim Moore thinks they're close. The guys think they're close. I mean, whoever played in this game last year remembers that outcome. But also, Kyle McCord threw for 470 yards.
Yeah.
Some damage. And, one of the receivers who's back had a monster game. And I know Rondé Gadsden's not back, but
Daryl Gill you're thinking of. Yeah, he went off. That was his breakout game. I think it was 185 yards.
Yeah, first play of the game, he goes deep, and then second play at 7-0, and we're going, uh-oh. But the Huskies were able to right the ship and hang in there. And that's the thing. I mean, think about this, Tim. I mean, you've been around enough. I know you're, just a 2020 grad, so you're still somewhat of a BB in the business. But, I mean, think about where we were 4 years ago with football. We had no idea what Jim Moore was going to be able to do, and he's been amazing. Young coaching staff, they've been able to keep everybody intact. So big for a second straight year now. We have the same head coach, the same offensive coordinator, the same defensive coordinator. That is humongous in this day and age, and guys could have left. A few guys did, but the bulk of the guys decided to stay, and that's just immense for what Jim Moore has done with this program and able to keep guys around. Yes, they've gotten some NIL help, not like the Power Fours, but they've gotten some help there to keep guys around. But what they have done from a culture standpoint, guys buying in, none of them feel entitled. They have mentioned that the entire time he's been here. Guys have that work ethic. Like they have a chip on their shoulder, and they want to prove themselves. And here's another opportunity to do so on Saturday.
Have you noticed, Bob, and you've obviously been around UConn for a long time, that there is more buy-in right now on football, and maybe that's somewhat to do with the current state of college athletics, but you're talking about how they're improving year over year in the NIL. Do you feel like the fan base and just the athletic department as a whole is a little bit more bought into UConn football right now?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the football alums have really contributed in a big way, and obviously they have donors that have helped too. But the administration certainly has. I mean, they have made the most of this tough situation as an independent, as good as they have possibly been able to do. I mean, when you have the regional teams on your schedule, and I'm talking like Syracuse, who we're playing for the next 3 years, BC off and on. I think Pittsburgh's on the schedule at some point. It'd be great to have Rutgers back, but you get those regional games plus a lot of the group of 5 opponents that are going to show up on the schedule. I think it's been extraordinary what they've been able to do, and now, of course, Jim is winning. I mean, the bowl game at Fenway was fantastic. Yes, it was a watered-down North Carolina team. I understand that. But it was a Saturday. The UConn fans traveled really well to Fenway. It felt like a home game. The atmosphere was tremendous. And, Matt, I'm sure will tell you at some point, when the two teams were in the Big East and they played at the Rent and at the Dome,
yeah.
and the Rent tough place to play. I mean, those were the glory days of UConn football, the first decade of the 2000s, like from 2003 to 2010. I mean, you packed 40,000 in that place, and it was loud, it was electric, and it was dominating. So can it get to that point again? I don't know. We'll see. Obviously Duke's the most high-profile home game, but they drew, they announced 37,000 for the first game. I'd say probably at least 30,000 were in the building, but now a chance to get better opponents, a good atmosphere, but they've developed the culture at least of winning football again. Like I said, I didn't know 4 years ago where we would be in this situation, but Jim and his staff and the program, the university, they've made the most of it. So here we are, and we're excited again about football here in Storrs.
All right, well, before we let you go, what's a formula for a UConn win on Saturday? What stands out as the big things that have to fall into place?
Well, I think they need to get some turnovers, which they didn't do last year. I mean, Demont Brinson had an interception at the goal line that he dropped, and it turned into a touchdown. So I think they've probably got to get some touchdowns. They've got to get some pressure on the quarterback. They did not sack the quarterback against Central Connecticut last week.
Wow.
Jim said, they've got to get Syracuse into some third and long situations. Obviously, the cornerbacks have to tackle extremely well the way the ball gets thrown around by Syracuse. They really put a lot of pressure on the opposing cornerbacks, or at least they did last year, and they're going to run well. And UConn, obviously, Joe Fagnano is going to have a mistake-free game, and they'll have to run the ball well. And I think Cam Edwards and Mel Brown will run the ball. I think Cam will have a decent game, I think, Saturday. But they can't make mistakes, and they hope they can maybe get a few from the Cuse, and, we'll see. But, again, I'm expecting a decent amount of points being scored on Saturday.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it.
I'm in agreement with you there. All right, Bob. Well, we appreciate you hopping on for a little bit and giving us the lay of the land for UConn, and I'm sure you'll be at the Dome Saturday, right?
Actually, I am, yes.
Nice.
I now host pre-half and post, and because we have a new engineer and it's his first road game, I will be there.
Awesome. Well, I'll look forward to seeing you Saturday. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, if you're up near the booth, stop by and say hi. I'll be there plenty early.
All right, there is Bob Joyce, UConn Radio Network host, women's basketball play-by-play guy. Always great to have him on and get his perspective on the Huskies here. And, yeah, I think it's going to be a whole lot of points in this game, which could be fun to watch from a neutral perspective. Seems like two offenses that feel good about how things went in week one. And interesting, that note on no sacks, because Syracuse didn't have a sack against Tennessee in week one either. Also, looking through the box score last year, just one sack from UConn, one sack from Syracuse last year in this game when the Orange were really throwing the ball a ton. Didn't run the ball great last year, really, period, and didn't run it much against UConn last year, but Kyle McCord did throw for 470 yards through the air last year. So we'll see if it's a shootout inside the Dome